Welcome to the Cheating Diaries channel. I, John, sat high in the stands of the sprawling sports complex, the echo of excited chatter and the rhythmic thud of feet pounding against the track filling the air. Today was a big day, the kind that seemed to stretch into an endless blur of adrenaline and determination. My wife Melissa was competing in the triathlon, and I was here to cheer her on. Melissa had always been driven. When she first started training for triathlons, I admired her dedication from the sidelines. Now, it felt almost surreal to watch her push through each segment of the race with such intensity. The swimming leg had come and gone, followed by the grueling bike portion, and now we were down to the final stretch, the run. The sun blazed down on the track, and the air was thick with the scent of sunscreen and sports drinks. I scanned the crowd of spectators, most of them wearing the same mix of excitement and nervous energy that I felt. I caught glimpses of other athletes as they passed, each one determined and focused, but my eyes always returned to Melissa. She was a picture of strength and grace, her determined expression a testament to countless hours of training and sacrifice. I could see the strain in her muscles, the sweat glistening on her forehead, but her stride was steady and unyielding. I knew she was giving it her all. Melissa and I had met years ago at a small local race. Her passion for sports was something I admired deeply. Over time, it became an integral part of who she was, and who we were as a couple. We shared so many moments like this one, filled with pride and encouragement. Yet today, there was a faint undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite shake. It wasn't anything specific, just a subtle sense of something being slightly out of place. As the runners approached the final lap, the crowd's cheers grew louder, a cacophony of support. I stood, clapping vigorously, my voice hoarse from shouting. Melissa's eyes met mine for a brief moment, and she flashed me a tired but triumphant smile. The connection was fleeting, but it was enough to reinforce the bond we shared. Her determination was awe-inspiring, and I couldn't help but feel a deep swell of pride as she crossed the finish line. She finished strong, and as she slowed to a walk, I made my way down to greet her. The crowd around us was buzzing with energy, but in that moment, all I could think about was how lucky I was to be married to such a remarkable woman. We embraced, and I could feel her heart racing against mine. Despite my lingering unease, seeing her happiness and achievement filled me with warmth. I couldn't help but think about how much we had been through together and how, despite the challenges, we had always managed to come out stronger on the other side. Melissa and I have always shared a deep bond, but one of the things that brought us even closer was her passion for sports. It all started a few years ago, not long after we met. Melissa had always been active. She loved hiking, cycling, and occasional runs, but triathlons were something new. She'd heard about them from a friend and was immediately intrigued. I remember the evening she first brought it up. We were sitting on the couch, relaxing after dinner, when she mentioned a local triathlon event. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she talked about it, her voice full of anticipation. "I think I want to give it a try," she said. I could see the determination on her face, and I knew that once Melissa set her mind to something, she didn't back down. Her enthusiasm was contagious. She signed up for her first race and began training with a fervor I hadn't seen before. Mornings were spent in the pool, afternoons on the bike, and evenings running. It was a grueling schedule, but she embraced it wholeheartedly, and as her training intensified, so did our involvement. I found myself attending every workout, cheering her on, and eventually becoming her biggest supporter. Melissa's dedication soon became a central theme in our lives. Our weekends were no longer spent lounging around or going out for casual dinners. Instead, they were filled with long bike rides, swim drills, and running sessions. Our conversations revolved around nutrition plans, training schedules, and race strategies. It was a shift, but one that I embraced because it made her happy. Her commitment to triathlons brought out a new side of her, a side that was fiercely determined, incredibly disciplined, and utterly inspiring. It wasn't just about the races. It was about pushing her limits, setting goals, and achieving them. I watched her transform from an enthusiastic amateur to a serious competitor, and it was a privilege to witness her growth. Melissa's passion for sports extended beyond just her achievements. She began volunteering at local events, helping to organize races, and encouraging others to get involved. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about building a community and sharing her love for the sport with others. Her energy was infectious, and it was clear that sports had become a cornerstone of our lives. As I reflected on how this journey began, I couldn't help but admire the way Melissa had woven her passion into the fabric of our lives. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. Her drive and commitment were a constant reminder of how powerful it could be to follow one's dreams. And while I might have missed the old, more relaxed days, I couldn't deny the sense of pride I felt in watching her chase her goals with such unrelenting enthusiasm. It started as a subtle shift, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but that lingered in the back of my mind. Melissa's commitment to her training had always been intense, but recently it had reached a new level. She seemed to be spending even more time at the gym or out on the track, and our once easygoing evenings had become rare. She came home later and later, often looking exhausted but still vibrant, a mix of accomplishment and weariness that was becoming familiar. At first, I told myself it was just the nature of her training schedule. The races were getting more competitive, and the demands on her time were increasing. But it wasn't just the extra hours that caught my attention. It was the little things that seemed out of place. Melissa's phone, for example, had become a source of growing curiosity for me. I noticed her receiving frequent messages, always discreetly and usually at odd hours. She'd glance at her phone, her face shifting into an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It was the way she would immediately delete those messages before I could catch a glimpse of them that began to gnaw at me. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. Melissa and I had always had a strong, open relationship, but something about the secrecy felt unsettling. One evening, as I sat in the living room reading, I overheard her in the kitchen talking on the phone. Her voice was softer than usual, and she kept glancing towards the door as if to make sure I couldn't hear. When she hung up, she quickly grabbed her phone and deleted a series of messages with a speed that seemed almost practiced. The urgency in her movement struck me as odd, a sharp contrast to the relaxed, carefree demeanor she usually carried. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was planning surprise events for me or her training partners. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more my unease grew. It wasn't just the phone. It was the little changes in her behavior. She was less talkative about her day, more guarded when I asked about her training sessions, and more focused on her phone, which seemed to be a frequent source of distraction. I began to feel like an outsider in our own home. The late nights at the gym became more frequent, and her absences during the day were increasingly common. I tried to engage in conversation, to ask about her training or the people she was working with, but her responses were always vague, often brushed off with a hurried smile. The once familiar routine of our lives now felt different, colored by an unspoken tension that I couldn't ignore. I was left grappling with my suspicions, trying to balance my trust in Melissa with the growing feeling that something wasn't right. It was as if a veil had descended over our relationship, one that I couldn't lift, no matter how hard I tried. Each time Melissa came home late, or her phone buzzed with another message, I felt a pang of worry, a creeping sense that something was shifting beneath the surface. As I tried to piece together the fragments of her behavior, I couldn't shake the feeling that the secret she was keeping was more significant than any training schedule or unexpected work commitment. The day of the triathlon competition arrived, and the sports complex was bustling with energy. Melissa was preparing for her race, and I was among the crowd of supporters. The atmosphere was electric, with athletes stretching, warming up, and exchanging encouraging words. I decided to take the opportunity to finally meet the person who had been guiding Melissa through her rigorous training, her coach, Tom. I spotted Tom standing near the registration desk, clipboard in hand, giving instructions to a group of athletes. He was tall and fit, with a demeanor that conveyed both authority and approachability. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and he wore a bright smile that seemed to put everyone around him at ease. Gathering my courage, I made my way over to introduce myself. Tom noticed me approaching and extended a friendly hand. "Hi, you must be John. I'm Tom," he said with a warm, welcoming tone. His handshake was firm, and his eyes held a genuine kindness that immediately put me at ease. "It's great to finally meet you," I said, shaking his hand. "Melissa speaks highly of you. I've heard you've been instrumental in her training." Tom's smile widened. "She's a fantastic athlete. It's been a pleasure working with her. She's one of the most dedicated competitors I've met." As we talked, I could see why Melissa had such respect for him. Tom was knowledgeable and passionate about his work, his enthusiasm for the sport evident in every word he spoke. He explained some of the techniques and strategies he used with his athletes, and his insights were both impressive and enlightening. Melissa has made tremendous progress, Tom continued. She's pushing her limits, and it's been incredible to watch her growth. She's got a great attitude and a strong will. I nodded, feeling a sense of pride. She's always been determined, but hearing it from you puts it into perspective. Tom's demeanor remained warm and professional, and he seemed genuinely interested in talking about Melissa's progress and achievements. There was a certain ease in his manner that suggested he was not only a skilled coach, but also someone who genuinely cared about the people he worked with. As we continued chatting, Tom mentioned a few other athletes he was coaching and some upcoming events they were preparing for. He was articulate and engaging, and I found myself appreciating his approach to coaching and his dedication to his athletes. Despite the pleasant interaction, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been building. While Tom was friendly and professional, there was something about the way he interacted with Melissa that felt a bit too familiar. It was a fleeting impression, easily dismissed, but it lingered in the back of my mind. After a few more minutes of conversation, Tom excused himself to attend to last-minute details before the race. I watched him walk away, his confidence and composure evident in every step. I was grateful for the opportunity to meet him and gain a bit more insight into the person guiding Melissa's training. As I returned to my spot in the stands, I couldn't help but wonder if this seemingly ideal coach might be more involved in Melissa's life than I had realized. The friendly facade he presented was genuine, but I was left with a nagging sense that there might be more beneath the surface. It was a bright, crisp Saturday morning, and the sports complex was buzzing with activity. Melissa had a training session scheduled with Tom, and I decided to attend, hoping to catch a glimpse of her progress and maybe ease my growing concerns. The complex had become a second home for us, with its familiar sights and sounds now woven into the fabric of our daily lives. I took a seat on one of the benches overlooking the track, where Melissa and Tom were engaged in a running drill. The sun cast long shadows as the athletes sprinted around the track, their rhythmic pounding a steady background noise. Melissa, dressed in her usual gear, was focused and determined, her stride strong and purposeful. Tom was standing beside her, offering guidance and encouragement. I could hear snippets of their conversation carried by the breeze. Tom was giving her feedback on her form, and Melissa was nodding, absorbing his instructions with an intensity that spoke to her dedication. But then something caught my eye. As Melissa slowed to a cool-down jog, Tom moved closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. The gesture seemed too intimate for a professional setting, and it made me pause. They exchanged a few words, and I noticed the way Tom's gaze lingered on her, the way Melissa responded with a smile that seemed to hold a hint of something more personal. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was just the closeness that developed between a coach and an athlete over time. However, the interaction felt different from what I had observed before. It wasn't just about sports anymore. It was as if there was an undercurrent of familiarity and connection that went beyond the professional. Melissa and Tom continued their conversation, their heads leaning in as if sharing a private joke or a secret. The way they looked at each other, the subtle touches, like Tom adjusting her running gear or brushing a stray hair from her face, felt more intimate than the typical coach-athlete dynamic. I shifted uncomfortably on the bench, trying to keep my growing unease at bay. I watched as they wrapped up the session, Tom giving Melissa a reassuring pat on the back before she gathered her things. Their interaction was casual, but there was a warmth and familiarity that lingered in the air. When Melissa finally approached me, her face flushed with the satisfaction of a good workout, I forced a smile. "How was the session?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as possible. "It was great," Melissa said, her eyes bright. "Tom's pushing me, but I'm seeing results. It's exciting." I nodded, masking my concern with a supportive grin. "I could see that. Tom seems like a really good coach." "He is," she agreed, her tone filled with admiration. "I'm lucky to have him." As we walked back to the car, my mind raced with thoughts of what I had just seen. I tried to shake off the feeling of discomfort, convincing myself that it was all in my head. Yet, the image of Tom's hand on Melissa's shoulder and the way they had interacted stayed with me, adding another layer to the growing tension I was feeling. I knew I needed to address my concerns with Melissa, but the lingering uncertainty and the fear of overstepping made it difficult to find the right approach. For now, all I could do was continue to observe and hope that my fears were unfounded. As the weeks went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Melissa's behavior had subtly shifted, and it was becoming harder to ignore the growing sense of unease that had taken root in my mind. Her involvement in training and competitions had always been a significant part of our lives, but lately, she seemed to be pulling away from discussing it in detail. It started with small changes. During our dinners together, I'd ask about her workouts or any new techniques she was learning, but Melissa would offer vague responses. "It was fine," she'd say, or "nothing new, just the usual." Her answers were brief and lacked the enthusiasm she used to have when talking about her training. When I pressed further, trying to understand what she was working on or how she felt about her progress, Melissa would quickly change the subject. She'd talk about something else entirely, from mundane household matters to random bits of news, always steering the conversation away from her training. One evening, I asked about an upcoming competition she had been preparing for. "How's the preparation going for the big race?" I inquired, hoping to hear about her plans and expectations. "Oh, just the usual stuff," she replied with a distracted tone. "Nothing special to report." I sensed a shift in her demeanor, a subtle defensiveness that I hadn't noticed before. Her face was composed, but there was a slight edge to her voice that made me wary. It wasn't like her to be so closed off about something she was so passionate about. On weekends, when Melissa would usually be training or attending team meetings, she started spending more time away from home, often coming back later than expected. When I asked where she had been or who she had been with, she'd offer a quick explanation, often citing a new workout routine or additional drills, but the details never added up. The most striking change was how she'd frequently check her phone during these times. She'd get messages and immediately glance at them before quickly hiding her phone or deleting messages without showing them to me. I tried to give her space, but the secrecy was beginning to feel more pronounced. One day, after noticing that Melissa had left her phone unattended, I couldn't resist glancing at the screen. There were several unread messages from an unknown number, but I had no way of knowing what they said. When Melissa returned and noticed me looking, she quickly grabbed her phone and slipped it into her bag with a hurried smile. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just wondering what you're up to," I said, forcing a nonchalant tone. "You've been so busy lately." Melissa's smile faded slightly and she offered a quick, evasive response. "Just a lot going on, I guess. You know how it is with training." Her reluctance to open up and the increasing distance between us was starting to take a toll on me. I felt like I was losing touch with the woman I had once known so well. Each day brought new hints of something being amiss, and despite my attempts to confront the issue, I was left with more questions than answers. The doubts I had initially brushed off were now firmly entrenched in my mind. The lack of transparency and the growing distance felt like a silent signal, warning me of an underlying problem I was struggling to pinpoint. It was becoming clear that whatever was happening was more than just a shift in routine. It was a fundamental change in the dynamic of our relationship. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as I strolled through the park, taking a much-needed break from the whirlwind of my thoughts. The crisp air was refreshing, but it did little to clear the growing fog of uncertainty that had been clouding my mind. I met up with my friend James, who had suggested a walk to catch up and unwind. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and I hoped that some conversation might help me gain perspective on my mounting concerns. James and I wandered along the winding paths, reminiscing about old times and sharing updates on our lives. Our conversation flowed easily, a comforting contrast to the turmoil I was feeling at home. As we talked about work and other trivial matters, I decided to bring up my worries about Melissa. "I've been feeling a bit unsettled lately," I admitted. "Melissa's been acting different, more distant, and she's been spending a lot of time with her coach, Tom." James looked at me with a concerned expression. "What do you mean by different?" I explained the changes I had noticed, her reluctance to discuss her training, the secrecy around her phone, and her frequent absences. James listened intently, nodding as I spoke. "Have you had a chance to talk to her about it?" he asked. "I've tried, but she always deflects or changes the subject," I replied. "It's like she's hiding something." James paused for a moment, his brow furrowing as he seemed to consider my words. "I might have some insight into that." I turned to him, my curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "Well, James began. "I was at that cafe near the training complex a few days ago. You know, the one that's popular with the athletes. Anyway, I saw Melissa and Tom there, having coffee together. They seemed pretty engrossed in their conversation. My heart skipped a beat. You saw them together? What were they doing?" James shrugged. "They were just talking and laughing. It didn't seem like anything too out of the ordinary, but there was a sense of familiarity between them. It wasn't just a casual meeting. It felt a bit more personal." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been grappling with vague suspicions, but hearing that they had been spending time together outside of the training environment added a new layer of concern. I tried to keep my voice steady as I responded. "Did they seem like they were discussing something specific, or was it just general chatter?" I asked, struggling to keep my emotions in check. James shook his head. "I couldn't hear the specifics, but from the way they were interacting, it didn't seem like a strictly professional conversation. They were laughing and leaning in close, which is not something I'd expect between a coach and an athlete." I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. The signs I had been noticing, the secrecy, the distance, were now taking on a new meaning. It wasn't just about her training or the time she spent away. It was about the nature of her relationship with Tom. "Thanks for telling me," I said quietly. "I appreciate it. I guess I need to figure out what to do next." James placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I know this is tough, John. Just remember that whatever happens, you're not alone. You've got friends who care about you." We continued our walk in silence, the weight of the new information pressing heavily on my mind. The peaceful surroundings of the park did little to soothe the storm brewing within me. As I tried to process what James had revealed, I realized that the time had come to confront Melissa and seek the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The tension in our home was palpable as I prepared for the conversation I had been dreading. The weight of my suspicions and the recent revelation from James had reached a tipping point. I couldn't ignore the mounting evidence and the unsettling feelings any longer. Tonight, I needed to confront Melissa directly about her relationship with Tom. Melissa had come home late from a training session, as usual. I had been pacing around the living room, trying to calm my racing thoughts. As she walked in, tired but cheerful, I knew it was now or never. I took a deep breath and approached her, my heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and determination. "Melissa, can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Sure, John. What's up?" We sat down on the couch, the familiar comfort of our home feeling foreign and tense in the face of what I was about to say. I took another deep breath, searching for the right words. "I've noticed that you've been very distant lately. You've been spending a lot of time with Tom, and I've heard things that make me uncomfortable." Melissa's expression shifted to one of concern. "What kind of things, John?" "I saw you and Tom at a cafe together," I began, "and my friend James mentioned that you seemed more than just a coach and athlete. It looked like you were having a very personal conversation." Her eyes widened and she quickly shook her head. "John, it's not what you think." I leaned forward, trying to catch her gaze. "I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, but the secrecy around your phone, the late nights, and the way you interact with Tom, it all seems like more than just a professional relationship." Melissa's face flushed with a mix of frustration and defensiveness. "I can't believe you're questioning me like this. Tom is my coach. Our interactions are strictly professional. Yes, we talk about training and strategy, but that's all it is." "But why the secrecy?" I pressed. "Why do you delete messages and avoid talking about your training in detail? Why has everything changed?" She took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing slightly. "John, I'm a competitive athlete. I need to focus on my training, and sometimes that means I'm busy or distracted. It doesn't mean something is going on with Tom. He's just doing his job." I could see the earnestness in her eyes, but there was something about her reaction that felt too rehearsed. "Melissa, I'm trying to understand. I want to trust you, but your behavior is making it hard." Melissa's shoulders slumped slightly, and she looked away for a moment. "John, I know things have been different lately, but that's because I've been pushing myself harder than ever. Tom's been helping me reach new goals, and yes, we have a close professional relationship, but nothing more." I wanted to believe her, to accept that this was all just a misunderstanding, but the gnawing doubts remained. "So there's nothing more going on between you and Tom?" "Absolutely nothing," she said firmly. "I swear, It's all about my training and nothing else." The firmness in her voice and the sincerity in her eyes left me conflicted. On one hand, I wanted to trust her and believe that her reassurances were true. On the other, the doubts and the evidence I had seen couldn't be easily dismissed. I felt a mixture of relief and confusion, unsure of how to proceed. "Okay," I said quietly. "I'll take your word for it. But I need us to work on being more open with each other. I don't want to feel like there's something hidden between us." Melissa nodded, her expression softening. "I understand, John. I'll make more of an effort to communicate better. I just hope you can trust me." As the conversation ended, the room felt quieter, the air heavy with the unspoken. I was left grappling with the aftermath of the confrontation, unsure of where to go from here. The truth felt elusive, and while Melissa had denied any wrongdoing, the lingering questions remained. The uneasy calm that followed our confrontation lingered in our home. Despite Melissa's assurances, I couldn't shake the growing suspicion that there was more to her relationship with Tom than she had admitted. The secrecy, the late nights, and her avoidance of details still weighed heavily on my mind. One evening, after another grueling training session, Melissa mentioned that she had plans with some of her training partners. Her explanation was vague, just that they were meeting up for a casual catch-up. I decided to follow her, hoping to uncover whether there was more to her story. I waited until Melissa had left the house, her car pulling out of the driveway with a sense of finality. I quickly grabbed my keys and decided to follow at a discreet distance. My heart pounded as I drove through the streets, trying to keep my distance while keeping her car in sight. The growing sense of apprehension made every traffic light feel like an eternity. Melissa's route took her away from the training complex and towards a part of town I wasn't familiar with. My nerves were on edge as I followed her, careful to stay far enough behind to avoid detection. The sun was beginning to set, casting a dim orange glow over the city, adding to the uneasy atmosphere of the evening. She eventually pulled into a small, cozy cafe on the outskirts of town, one I had never seen before. I parked a little way down the street, my eyes fixed on the cafe's entrance. The place had a warm, inviting look from the outside, but tonight it felt more like a setting for an unfolding mystery. I waited for a while, watching as Melissa walked into the cafe. She didn't seem to glance around, not even once, which made me wonder if she was aware of how conspicuous her actions were. After a few minutes, I decided to park my car and approach the cafe on foot, hoping to blend in with the evening crowd. As I neared the cafe, I tried to maintain a casual demeanor. I peered through the large windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of Melissa and see who she was meeting. The cafe's interior was softly lit, with a mix of patrons scattered around tables. I scanned the room, my gaze searching for her familiar face. It didn't take long before I spotted her at a table in the far corner. Tom was sitting across from her, his demeanor relaxed as he gestured animatedly while talking. Melissa appeared engaged, laughing at something Tom said. The sight was both comforting and unsettling. They looked like old friends sharing a moment, but it did little to ease my doubts. I moved to a nearby table, ordering a coffee to give myself an excuse to stay in the cafe without drawing attention. As I sipped my drink, I tried to overhear their conversation, but the soft hum of the cafe made it difficult. I could see their body language clearly, though. There was an easy familiarity between them, a closeness that seemed to go beyond mere coaching. After a while, Tom's hand brushed against Melissa's as he reached for his cup, and she smiled at him in a way that felt too intimate for a professional relationship. They leaned in close, their heads touching as they shared a laugh. It was a scene that confirmed my fears, adding weight to the doubts I'd been trying to dismiss. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, feeling like an intruder in a moment that was meant to be private. As their meeting wrapped up, Tom stood and said his goodbyes, giving Melissa a friendly but lingering hug before leaving the cafe. Melissa watched him go, and her expression, once filled with warmth, shifted to one of contemplation as she gathered her things. As she left the cafe and headed back to her car, I quietly slipped out and followed her from a distance, ensuring I kept my presence discreet. When she finally arrived home, the familiar sight of our house felt colder than usual. The sight of her smiling at me, unaware of the shadow of suspicion that had been cast over our relationship, made the evening's discoveries even harder to bear. I had seen enough to know that Melissa and Tom's relationship was more than what she had admitted. The doubts that had been simmering now felt like undeniable truths. The confrontation it had with Melissa was far from over, and now I needed to decide how to address what I had witnessed and how to navigate the increasingly complicated reality of our relationship. The day had been unusually quiet. Melissa's training session at the sports complex had ended later than usual, and the lingering uncertainty gnawed at me as I waited for her return. I was still processing the events of the previous night, seeing her and Tom together at the cafe, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more I needed to uncover. After some deliberation, I decided to head to the sports complex again, hoping to catch Melissa as she finished up her session. I arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I parked my car at a discreet distance and waited, watching the familiar scene of athletes arriving and departing. As the minutes ticked by, I finally saw Melissa and Tom walking out of the complex together. They were deep in conversation, their body language relaxed and comfortable. Melissa was laughing at something Tom said, her face lit up with a genuine smile that seemed to have a new depth to it. I felt a pang of anxiety as I started my car and followed them from a distance. They headed towards Tom's car, which was parked a few spots away from mine. Tom opened the passenger door for Melissa, and she slipped into the seat with a laugh. They exchanged a look that spoke volumes, filled with unspoken understanding and familiarity. My heart raced as I followed them, maintaining a careful distance. Tom drove with a steady hand, and I kept behind, trying to stay out of sight. The drive was tense. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the occasional click of my turn signal. I felt like a shadow trailing their every move, my anxiety mounting with each passing minute. They eventually arrived at a hotel on the edge of town. The building was a modest, 3-star establishment, but it had a quiet elegance that contrasted sharply with the turmoil I felt inside. I parked a little way down the street and watched as Melissa and Tom got out of the car and walked towards the entrance together. Melissa glanced around briefly before entering the hotel, her hand brushing against Tom's as they approached the front desk. They exchanged a few words with the receptionist, and I saw Tom hand over a credit card. The check-in process seemed smooth and effortless, their interactions filled with a sense of ease and familiarity. As they moved to the elevator, I quickly parked my car and made my way toward the hotel entrance, hoping to catch a glimpse of them before they disappeared. I entered the lobby and took a seat in the waiting area, trying to blend in with the few other guests who were around. Through the lobby's glass doors, I watched as they reached the elevator and pressed the button for the upper floors. The elevator doors closed, and I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. It was becoming increasingly clear that their relationship was more than just professional. I remained in the lobby for a while, trying to gather my thoughts. The reality of what I had seen, Melissa and Tom checking into a hotel together, was hitting me with a force that was hard to ignore. It was undeniable evidence of a relationship that went beyond the boundaries of coaching and training. As I left the hotel, my mind was racing with questions and emotions. The confrontation I had been avoiding now felt inevitable. I needed to address this head-on with Melissa, but the weight of the situation and the fear of how it might unravel made the prospect daunting. The evidence I had gathered left little room for doubt, and the next steps would be crucial in determining how we moved forward. The drive back from the hotel was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel with a force that made my knuckles white, and my mind was a storm of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. The reality of what I had seen, Melissa and Tom together in a hotel, was crashing over me in relentless waves. I pulled into the driveway, the familiar sight of our home offering no comfort. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage of betrayal. My thoughts were a whirlwind, and I could barely process the emotions swirling within me. I stumbled inside, my steps heavy with the weight of my feelings. The house was eerily quiet, the silence amplifying the chaos in my head. I wandered through the rooms, not seeing them, my mind replaying the scenes from earlier. Melissa laughing with Tom, the ease with which they interacted, the undeniable evidence of their intimacy. My anger was a living, breathing thing. It roared inside me, demanding to be acknowledged, demanding release. I felt like I was on the edge of losing control, teetering on the brink of an emotional abyss. In the living room, I sank onto the couch, my face buried in my hands. The tears came unbidden, a mix of frustration and pain that I couldn't hold back any longer. I felt utterly alone, betrayed by the person I had trusted most in the world. My breath came in ragged gasps as the depth of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow. How could she do this to me? I supported her, cheered her on, and stood by her through every training session and competition. The love and trust I had invested seemed to have been taken for granted. My heart was breaking as I grappled with the realization that the foundation of our relationship had been shaken to its core. I paced back and forth, my mind racing with thoughts of confrontation. What would I say? How would I address the evidence I had seen? The questions swirled around, each one feeding the fire of my anger and disappointment. Amid the emotional storm, I felt a surge of resolve. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The uncertainty and half-truths had gone on long enough. I had to confront Melissa, but the thought of facing her with the raw intensity of my emotions was daunting. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number, my hands trembling as I listened to the ring. Each tone seemed to echo the tumult within me. When Melissa finally answered, her voice was light and cheerful, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. "Hey John," she said. "What's up?" Her casual tone was like a slap in the face. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Melissa, we need to talk. Now." There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear her confusion. "What's going on?" "I know what you've been doing," I said, my voice tight with anger. "I saw you with Tom. I saw you check into a hotel with him. I need to know why." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken truths. The anger and hurt that had been simmering inside me were now coming to the surface, and I could only hope that this confrontation would bring clarity, even if it meant facing the painful reality of our fractured relationship. As I waited for Melissa's response, I knew that the path ahead would be difficult and fraught with emotion. But for now, all I could do was hold on to the hope that this conversation would finally reveal the truth and perhaps offer some semblance of resolution to the turmoil that had consumed me. The hours dragged on as I waited for Melissa to come home. Each passing minute felt like a lifetime, the tension in the house palpable. I was a bundle of nerves, the anger and hurt from the evening's revelations simmering just beneath the surface. I knew this conversation would be the breaking point of our relationship, but it was necessary to confront the truth. Finally, I heard the familiar sound of Melissa's car pulling into the driveway. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as I prepared for the inevitable confrontation. I stood in the hallway, feeling a mix of dread and resolve. The moment she walked through the door, I knew it was time to face the reality of our situation. Melissa entered, her expression brightening as she saw me. "John, you're still up. I didn't expect—" Her greeting faltered as she noticed the intensity in my eyes. I cut her off, my voice firm and unwavering. "Melissa, we need to talk. Please, sit down." She looked taken aback but complied, sitting on the edge of the couch. I took a seat opposite her, the space between us feeling like an unbridgeable chasm. I searched for the right words, but the gravity of the situation made it difficult to speak calmly. "I know about you and Tom," I began, my voice tight with emotion. "I saw you two at the hotel. You can't deny it any longer. I need to hear the truth from you." Melissa's eyes widened in shock, and she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out at first. She seemed to be grappling with her thoughts, trying to find a way to deflect the conversation. "John, I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally, her voice trembling. "There must be some mistake. Tom and I have a professional relationship. I don't see—" "Don't lie to me, Melissa," I interrupted, the hurt and frustration in my voice impossible to mask. "I saw you with him. You were in a hotel together. This isn't just about training or coaching anymore." Her face fell, and she looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken truths. After what felt like an eternity, Melissa took a deep breath and finally met my gaze. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something more between Tom and me." The admission hit me like a physical blow. My heart sank as I struggled to process her words. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor of pain. Melissa's eyes were filled with regret and sorrow. "It started a few months ago. We became close during training, and one thing led to another. I didn't mean for it to get this far, but I've developed feelings for him." "Feelings?" I repeated, trying to make sense of her confession. Melissa, this is more than just feelings. You've been seeing him behind my back, and you've been hiding it from me. I know, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, John. I never wanted to hurt you. I should have been honest from the beginning, but I was afraid of what you would think, and I didn't know how to stop it. The depth of her betrayal was almost too much to bear. The woman I had trusted and loved had been leading a double life, and the pain of that realization was almost unbearable. I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, but it did little to soothe the wounds that had been inflicted. What about us, Melissa? I asked, my voice raw. What happens now? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know. I've made such a mess of things. I never meant for this to happen. I want to make things right, but I understand if you can't forgive me. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. The path forward seemed uncertain and fraught with difficulty. The trust that had been shattered would take time to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. For now, all I could do was grapple with the raw reality of her betrayal and consider how to navigate the fractured pieces of our relationship. As Melissa sat there, her eyes pleading for understanding, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and a deep sense of loss. The conversation had revealed the painful truth, but the journey to healing and resolution was only just beginning. The next morning, I woke with a heavy heart, the weight of the previous night's revelation still fresh in my mind. I knew I couldn't leave things unresolved. I needed to confront Tom directly. It was time to get answers from the man who had been at the center of the storm tearing apart my life. I made my way to the sports complex, hoping to catch Tom before he began his day. The drive was a mix of anger and resolve, each mile adding to the sense of urgency I felt. When I arrived, I parked and headed towards the training area, my thoughts focused on the confrontation that awaited. As I walked into the sports complex, I spotted Tom standing by the training equipment, talking with some of the athletes. His demeanor seemed relaxed, a stark contrast to the turmoil I was feeling. I approached him with a determined stride, my emotions simmering just beneath the surface. Tom, I said, my voice firm but controlled. We need to talk. Tom looked up, his expression shifting from casual to wary. He excused himself from the group and followed me to a quieter corner of the complex. The tension between us was palpable as we stood facing each other, the air charged with the weight of our unspoken grievances. What's going on, John? Tom asked, trying to maintain a calm exterior. I know about you and Melissa, I said, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. I saw you two together at the hotel. I need you to explain yourself. Tom's face fell and he rubbed the back of his neck nervously. I guess there's no point in denying it. I'm sorry for the pain this has caused you. I struggled to contain my anger. Sorry isn't enough, Tom. I need to understand what happened. How did this relationship start? And why did you and Melissa think it was okay to keep it a secret from me? Tom sighed, his eyes meeting mine with a mix of regret and resignation. Melissa and I started as coach and athlete. It was professional at first, but as we spent more time together, our feelings grew. We tried to keep it focused on the training, but somewhere along the way, things changed. I shook my head, trying to process his words. You knew she was married, Tom. You knew the situation she was in. How could you justify crossing those boundaries? I didn't intend for things to go this way, Tom said, his voice filled with remorse. We tried to ignore the feelings, but it wasn't that simple. We developed a connection that went beyond just coaching, and it became something neither of us could control. I wish things had been different, but we ended up falling for each other. So, you're telling me you and Melissa are in love? I asked, my voice strained. Tom nodded, his expression somber. Yes, we are. I know it's complicated and painful, but the truth is, we care deeply for each other. I never meant to hurt you, John. I just didn't know how to handle the situation. The confession hit me hard. The pain of betrayal was compounded by the realization that Melissa and Tom's feelings for each other were genuine, adding another layer to the heartbreak I was experiencing. I felt a mixture of anger and sadness, struggling to reconcile the reality of their relationship with the life I had thought I understood. I appreciate your honesty, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But that doesn't change the fact that you've caused a lot of pain. I need to figure out what to do next, but I'm not sure how to move forward from here. Tom nodded, his expression one of deep regret. I understand, John. I'm truly sorry for everything. If you need to talk more or if there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. As we parted ways, the weight of the conversation hung heavy. The answers I had sought were now in the open, but they did little to alleviate the pain of betrayal. The future of my relationship with Melissa remained uncertain, and the road ahead was filled with difficult decisions and emotional upheaval. The confrontation with Tom revealed the depth of the situation, but it also left me with more questions than answers. I needed time to process the revelations and consider the next steps in the aftermath of this painful chapter of my life. The days following my confrontation with Tom were a blur of confusion and heartache. Each morning brought with it the heavy burden of reflection, and each evening seemed to stretch endlessly as I grappled with the shattered pieces of my life. I found myself ensnared in a labyrinth of thoughts, trying to understand where things had gone awry and what steps to take next. I spent a lot of time in solitude, trying to make sense of the situation. I walked through the house, now filled with memories that felt tainted by betrayal. The photographs on the walls, the places where Melissa and I had shared moments of joy, they all seemed to echo with the weight of our fractured trust. Sitting in the living room, I stared out the window, watching the world go by in its usual rhythm, while my world felt frozen in turmoil. I thought about how we had gotten here, searching for the pivotal moments that might have hinted at the discontent brewing beneath the surface. Melissa had always been passionate about her training, but her involvement with Tom had taken that passion to a new level. The late nights, the secrecy, these had been subtle signs, but I had chosen to trust her, to believe in the strength of our relationship. I wondered if I had been too naive or if there were ways I could have been more attentive. My thoughts drifted to the nature of our relationship. Had I overlooked the signs of her unhappiness? Was there something in our marriage that had driven her to seek solace elsewhere? I grappled with these questions, torn between blaming myself and grappling with the harsh reality that trust had been broken. The conversations with Melissa and Tom had left me with more questions than answers. Their feelings for each other were genuine, and that truth was difficult to accept. The realization that Melissa's affection for Tom had developed into something profound made the situation even more painful. I struggled with the conflicting emotions of anger and empathy, trying to reconcile my love for Melissa with the betrayal she had caused. I began to consider what the future might hold. Could our relationship be salvaged, or had the damage been too great? The thought of rebuilding trust seemed daunting, but the idea of ending our marriage was equally overwhelming. I needed to take a step back and evaluate what was truly important to me. The process of self-reflection was painful but necessary. I spent time thinking about my own needs and desires, trying to understand what would bring me peace and fulfillment in the wake of this upheaval. I considered seeking counseling to help navigate the emotional landscape and to gain perspective on how to move forward. As I looked at the empty spaces that Melissa's presence used to fill, I realized that healing would require time. Time to process the betrayal, time to make decisions, and time to understand what I wanted for my future. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew I had to be honest with myself about what I needed to heal and move forward. In the quiet moments of reflection, I allowed myself to grieve the loss of the relationship I had once known. The pain was sharp and raw, but I also tried to hold on to hope that, through the process of self-discovery and healing, I might find clarity and a sense of direction. Ultimately, the journey through this complex emotional terrain was about finding the strength to make choices that were right for me. The path forward would be challenging, but I hoped that, through introspection and honest reflection, I could find a way to navigate the aftermath of this tumultuous period and emerge with a clearer understanding of what lay ahead. The decision to move forward after discovering Melissa's betrayal was one of the most challenging and painful choices I've ever faced. The process of introspection and reflection had made one thing clear. I could no longer continue living in a relationship that had been so fundamentally broken. After days of anguished contemplation and countless conversations with friends and a counselor, I reached a point where I had to confront the reality of my situation. The trust that once formed the bedrock of our relationship had been shattered, and despite my deep love for Melissa, I could no longer ignore the profound impact of her actions on our marriage. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a gentle light on the room where I had spent many quiet moments grappling with my thoughts. I sat at the kitchen table, the place where Melissa and I had shared countless conversations over the years. Now, It felt like a symbol of everything that had changed. The sense of finality in the decision I was about to make was both liberating and heartbreaking. I had always believed in the strength of our bond and the possibility of overcoming challenges together. But the depth of Melissa's betrayal, combined with the genuine feelings she had developed for Tom, had left me feeling unable to rebuild the trust and intimacy that once defined our relationship. The emotional toll of attempting to do so seemed too great. I gathered my thoughts and made the call to a divorce attorney, setting the wheels in motion for the legal process that would officially end our marriage. The decision was not made lightly. It came after countless sleepless nights and a deep emotional struggle. But as I spoke with the attorney, outlining the steps I needed to take, I felt a sense of resolution. When Melissa returned home later that day, I knew I had to be honest and straightforward. The house was filled with an oppressive silence as I waited for her to enter the room. The weight of the conversation we needed to have hung heavily in the air. "Melissa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as she walked in, "we need to talk." Her face looked weary, and she took a seat across from me, sensing the gravity of the moment. I took a deep breath and looked her in the eyes, my heart aching as I prepared to share my decision. "I've thought a lot about everything that's happened," I began, "and after much reflection, I've concluded that we can't continue our marriage." Melissa's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and she opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I've decided to file for divorce. I can't continue living in a relationship where trust has been irreparably damaged. I need to move forward, and I believe that's the best path for both of us." Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to process my words. "John, I know I've hurt you deeply, and I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to end like this." I felt a pang of sadness at her words, but the decision was made. "I know you're sorry, Melissa, but the damage is done, and I need to focus on healing and finding my path forward." We spent the next few hours discussing the practical aspects of our separation, how to divide our belongings, manage our finances, and handle the logistics of moving forward. The conversation was fraught with emotion, but it was necessary to address these practical matters to ensure a smoother transition. As the evening settled in, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The decision to file for divorce was a necessary step toward healing, but it came with a profound sense of loss. I knew that both Melissa and I would need time to adjust to the new reality of our lives. In the quiet of the night, as I sat alone in the house that had once been a symbol of our shared life, I reflected on the journey ahead. The road to healing would be long and filled with challenges, but I was determined to face it with strength and resilience. The decision to move on was not just about ending a chapter, but about finding a path to personal growth and eventual peace. The path forward was uncertain, but for now, I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my own life and moving beyond the shadows of betrayal. As the finality of the divorce settled in, I found myself standing at the threshold of a new chapter in my life. The process of untangling my life from Melissa's had been emotionally draining, but it also marked the beginning of a fresh start. With the legalities behind me, I now had the opportunity to rebuild and rediscover who I was beyond the confines of our relationship. I started by focusing on my work. The projects and responsibilities that had once been a part of my daily routine now offered a welcome distraction and a sense of purpose. I threw myself into my job with renewed vigor, using the demands of my work to channel my energy and regain a sense of accomplishment. The routine of work, coupled with new challenges and opportunities, provided a much-needed sense of normalcy and structure. My colleagues and friends became invaluable sources of support during this transitional period. Their encouragement and understanding helped me navigate the emotional landscape of moving on. I found solace in spending time with them, sharing my experiences, and seeking their advice. Their presence reminded me that, even amid change, some constants and connections remained steadfast. One of the most significant changes was the time I dedicated to self-care and personal growth. I began exploring new hobbies and interests that I had previously set aside. Whether it was taking up a new sport, delving into a book I had always wanted to read, or experimenting with cooking new recipes, these activities helped me reconnect with myself and rediscover passions that had been overshadowed by the complexities of my previous life. As the weeks turned into months, the pain of the past began to fade, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. I started to envision a future that was not defined by the shadows of betrayal, but by my aspirations and dreams. The journey was not always easy, and there were moments when the weight of the past would resurface, but I learned to navigate these moments with resilience and self-compassion. I also began to think about the future in practical terms. I considered the possibility of moving to a new place, one that would offer a fresh perspective and a new environment. The idea of starting anew in a different location felt invigorating, and it became a symbol of my commitment to embracing change and forging a new path. Amid this transformation, I found comfort in small, everyday moments. Whether it was enjoying a quiet morning coffee, taking a walk in the park, or simply reflecting on the progress I had made, these moments provided a sense of peace and grounding. I learned to appreciate the simple joys and the beauty of each day, finding gratitude in the new experiences that life had to offer. Looking back, I could see the growth and change that had occurred as a result of the challenges I had faced. The journey from betrayal to healing had been arduous, but it had also been a period of profound self-discovery and strength. I'd come to understand that while the past could not be changed, the future was mine to shape. As I embraced this new chapter, I carried with me the lessons learned and the wisdom gained from the experiences that had shaped me. The road ahead was filled with possibilities, and I was determined to move forward with hope and optimism. With each passing day, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and a growing confidence in my ability to navigate the future. The pain of the past had given way to a sense of resilience, and I was ready to embrace the new opportunities and experiences that awaited me. The journey was ongoing, but I faced it with a heart open to new beginnings and a spirit ready to embrace the future. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on new videos.